The Congressional-Executive Committee on China, CECC, held a hearing yesterday to look into the economic coercion applied by CCP to force the world to go its way.
For the upcoming Beijing Olympics, what is the CCP's tactic on it?
With the diplomatic boycott by the US, what is the CCP's reaction and what is behind that reaction? Welcome to Wei and Kathy Show. I'm your host, Wei Fang.
And I'm Kathy Zhang.
All right, you already got our main topic today, so we'll just head right into it. Okay, from Australian wine to Norwegian salmon to Philippine banana to Taiwanese pineapples, the Chinese government recently has ramped up its intensity of the coercive behavior, especially its wide-reaching campaign against Australia in response to calls for independent inquiry into the origin of the COVID-19 and other political grievances.
So how CCP exports and imposes its authoritarian values to the globe through trade and business ties, and how to deal with it. The Congressional-Executive Commission on China held a hearing on December 7th to examine how China, under the CCP ruling, uses economic coercion to silence critics and achieve its political aim globally.
Well, Bonnie Glaser, he's the director of the she's the director of the Asian program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And she said that given China's status as the world's top trading nation, its second largest market and one of the largest providers of the development finance, the communist regime is in a position to exert enormous influence through the use of what she calls economic sticks and carrots. Beijing has put such tactics to use regularly in recent years to gain economic concessions from counterparties. Well, although such economic bullying has not always gotten the regime what it wanted, the intimidating effect is clear, especially when it comes to the ending criticism of the Beijing's behavior. And Glaser said the use of economic coercion has grown increasingly common in the recent decades. Let's take a look.
Since 2010, the PRC has used economic coercion more and more frequently. And in virtually every case, the targets have been companies and industries in democratic states, based on an apparent calculation that pressuring influential business constituencies in democracies will mobilize them to lobby their governments to change policies detrimental to China. Unlike traditional economic sanctions, Beijing's economic coercion usually relies on informal measures that provide plausible deniability and enable China to ratchet pressure up or down as needed. Chinese economic coercion tactics include import and export trade restrictions, tourism curbs, popular boycotts, and other measures. Over the years, Beijing has become increasingly bold in the use of such tactics. In two recent cases, the PRC has banned the import of almost a dozen products from Australia and blocked all imports from Lithuania in violation of WTO rules.
So another expert at the hearing, Zach Cooper, he's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He actually agreed on how the CCP intensified its economic coercion. And he pointed out three concerning trends.
Specifically, China's economic coercion has become more frequent, more targeted, and more explicit.
So more frequent, more targeted, more explicit. So in terms of the frequency, what he said.
Beijing is growing more willing to use economic tools for foreign policy ends. Whereas there were only a handful of cases of clear economic coercion by China in the early 2010s, experts have identified dozens of incidents over the last few years.
So Cooper gave examples. For example, there's an organization called the Alliance for Securing Democracy. It's an advocacy group, and Cooper served as a co-director. So He said that through this organization's authoritarian interference tracker, it identified 67 instances of economic coercion by the CCP against companies and individuals and countries in the last decades, but most of them are in the last few years. And that doesn't include like regions like Asia. It only tracked the transatlantic region. And he mentioned that the case did not include does not only including threats, but also sometimes the CCP used problematic positive inducement, and which was said as subversive carrots. And the Chinese Communist leader, he said, are using even more so such kind of tactics, although it's faced backfires. So in terms of the second trend, he said that the coercion is more targeted. He said earlier the CCP government pressured on Norway and Mongolia broadly impacted the key economic sectors in each country. However, there's a change.
But more recent measures have been designed to isolate specific companies and individuals. Human rights activists, political leaders, and businesses have all come under pressure for actions that the Communist Party opposes. Even adhering to foreign laws can now put companies at risk under China's new anti-sanctions law.
And Cooper pointed out that the third trend is that the Chinese Communist government's economic coercion, the statecraft, he said, is far more explicit than decades ago.
Beijing used to disguise most of its economic pressure, attempting to use ambiguity to make it more difficult to call them out as World Trade Organization violations. Today, however, China's leaders are more willing to be explicit when they use economic tools for coercive purposes. For example, Beijing has threatened to blacklist companies by putting them on an unreliable entity list.
And Hongfang Hong, he's a political science professor at Johns Hopkins University. He focused on the political and economic risk facing the foreign players operating in Hong Kong since the imposition of Beijing's national security law in June 2020. And Mr. Hong described Hong Kong as an indispensable financial center and a doorway through which much of the cash flow in and out of China moves. And he pointed out how such status has been largely tainted by the CCP regime.
Hong Kong Global Financial Center status hinges on its rule of law, freedom of the press, and the transparency of corporate governance. These foundations have been formed on the back of the CCP leaders, whose secret wealth kept in Hong Kong were often exposed by journalists. Hong Kong-based Chinese front companies that helped Iran, North Korea, and other unruly regimes to evade international sanctions are often exposed by journalists working in Hong Kong. Under the new political environment, the Hong Kong and Beijing governments have been passing new laws besides the national security law that enhance political control and jeopardize these foundations.
And just for example, over the summer, the Chinese regime was ready to apply its anti-foreign sanction laws on Hong Kong, which would force companies in the city to choose between violating international sanctions, U.S. sanctions, or violating Chinese law. He said that this impossible choice would have forced many corporations to give up and just leave Hong Kong. It also led to the Biden administration's on July 16th to issue a business warning to the U.S. companies doing business there. Beijing later shelved the plans to introduce such law. He added, though, such law is expected to come back sooner or later. Another example related to Huawei, as you know, the giant tech company from China. Let's take a look.
For another example, the Hong Kong government has started restricting public access to information of directors and executives of registered companies. If such a restriction had been in place earlier, journalists and the U.S. government would have never discovered that Huawei has been using a Hong Kong registered front company to violate international sanctions on Iran and trick a foreign bank to become inadvertent accomplice in the scheme.
And other developments in Hong Kong include passing or amending laws to prosecute journalists who disseminated powerful elites, to force social media platforms to delete contents or surrender private information. Okay, and independence and integrity of the financial regulation also affect Hong Kong Security and Future Commission. Okay, let me backroll a little bit. Hong Kong Security and Future Commission fined and banned an American short seller for publishing a negative research paper on Everglade, the real estate company which is almost going broke right now. It's rocking the financial market, and also fined Moody for warning corporate governance irregularities of the 49 companies in Hong Kong. In addition, foreign journalists denied visas to Hong Kong. He pointed out that this means that investment into the financial security issued by the CCP government and the companies will become increasingly risky. U.S. investors involved in these products also violate international sanctions and human rights. And Jenny Wang, a senior strategy and research associate at the Human Rights Foundation, analyzed the increasing costs that global corporations must pay in order to operate in China and access to the Chinese market. And she argued that on the surface, it is an economic issue, but it is actually human rights and a moral issue.
Companies wishing to profit in China must be willing to comply with draconian Chinese national laws or face expulsion from the market. When companies deliberately choose to censor or apologize to appease the Chinese government, they are offering legitimacy to the authoritarian regime and signaling their willingness to disregard not only the human rights of others, but of their own too, as the cost of doing business in China.
Well, as an example, Wang noted that in the March 2021, Swedish apparel brand H&M met with a boycott in China after issuing a statement of concern about the Uyghurs' forced labor in Xinjiang. And she pointed out that the upcoming Olympics will become the newest case of such coercion by the CCP.
With the 2022 Beijing Olympics just weeks away, it is expected that the Chinese government will continue its fierce campaign of economic coercion as a strategic tool to intimidate firms to remain silent about its human rights record.
So the 2020 Beijing Olympic game actually has become a focal point, one of the focal points in this hearing, as well as, in the headlines recent days. So the chairman of the CECC, Senator Jeff Merkley, he said that, in the beginning of the hearing, he said, as the second largest economy in the world and the largest trading partner to many countries around the world, China leverages the attraction of its market and the global economy's deep tie to supply chains in China to punish critics and reward self-censorship. So, and he gave example relates to the Olympics. He said earlier this year, the commission held a hearing with the top US-based sponsors of the Olympic Games. Even after being confronted with many of the most egregious human rights violations of the century, the company's testimony largely served, as he said, to demonstrate how the pull of the Chinese market continue to incentivize self-censorship. And why? He said that's because it's not easy to stand up to a government so willing to use its country's economic clout as a cudgel to bully individuals, corporations, and other sovereign states. And he said we saw this dynamic in action in recent weeks when a Marriott hotel in Prague turned away the World Uyghur Congress because of the concern about so-called political neutrality. But he said, yet not everybody is cowed into silent by the bullying of the CCP, the recent actions by the Women's Tennis Association to suspend tournaments in China in response to the treatment of the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai inspired him and many members of this mission. So one of the members, the ranking member of the CECC, a New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith, pointed out the theme of this Olympics.
We all know the motto of the 2022 Beijing Olympic Games is, quote, "Together for a shared future," ostensibly expressing an ideal of global solidarity and goodwill that is cherished globally. No one betrays this model more flagrantly and violently than the Chinese Communist Party.
And Chris Smith pointed out that how CCP, betray this type of theme, and also use the economic coercion. Actually, he said it started 20 years ago.
22 years ago, on December 8th, 1999, on why China should not be accepted into the WTO until systematic human rights violations that are pervasive were stopped. Yet the global community, from businesses to governments to the International Olympic Committee, continues to welcome China with open arms. Unfortunately, the PRC has used its power and stature to coerce as a means to achieve their ends.
He also cited the most recent target of CCP's economic coercion is Australia and Lithuania, and he especially praised Lithuania about its firm stance on the relationship with Taiwan as well as on the Beijing Olympics. And he said because Lithuania actually suffered from the communism before.
Indeed, perhaps Lithuania would have gone even further had the U.S. led by example and fully boycotted the Genocide Olympics, unless the venue were removed or moved from the PRC to another country.
And the chair, Representative Markley, asked one of the experts, Bonnie Gasser, if United States whether the United States diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympic could prevent the CCP from using as a propaganda facade.
I know that members of the Biden administration have been consulting very closely for months with our allies and partners on the issue of how we would respond to the Olympics. I personally think that it would have been ideal if the Olympics could have been moved out of Beijing. That way athletes would be able to participate, but the spotlight would not be on Beijing. They would not be able to benefit from being host. Unfortunately, that path was not taken, and so now I think the only option really that is available to us is to try to get as many countries as we can to stand with us in this coalition. I hope that we will see in the coming days countries state that they too will not be sending their diplomats to the Olympics. And I am sure that, as I said, the Biden administration is continuing to have discussions with them. But I'm personally disappointed that we did not announce simultaneously with our allies and partners. And if they shy away from doing so and send their officials, then I think that undermines our ability to signal China that their practices in Xinjiang and the other human rights violations that they are pursuing are unacceptable.
Yeah, so in regards to the CCP's tactics of the Beijing Olympics, we'll analyze for you. But before that, stay with us. But then, on the hearing, the panelists also offered a range of responses because, the commission want them to also provide suggestions, recommendations in terms of how to deal with such CCP's economic coercion. So the that responses including like a building of a large coalition of countries to boycott the Winter Olympics and put pressure on Beijing, discouraging or banning investment in Chinese government bonds, and showing solidarity with those like-minded nations and companies that stand up to Beijing. And Beijing tends not to retaliate so much against large, powerful entities like the United States and the European Union, but they go after smaller countries like Lithuania and, as some of the experts observed. So they suggest that we need to do what they need to do is to demonstrate solidarity with those smaller countries, standing behind them, and show that through either anti-coercion mechanism or some other collective actions, that actually the Chinese regime cannot isolate those smaller countries. And one of the expert, Zach Cooper, said he thinks it has to be the key message, because otherwise Beijing will be able to continue picking off smaller countries and the companies and individuals one at a time. But the panel also offered some good news in terms of actually the CCP got backfired. Congressman Chris Smith said, let's hear what he said.
The adverse effect on China's counterproductive tactic of economic coercion truly is now seeing some consequences. According to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, in April 2020, an internal report was circulated by the Chinese Institutes of Contemporary International Relations, a government-affiliated think tank associated with the PRC's top intelligence agency. This report concluded that, quote, global anti-China sentiment is at its highest since the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown.
And Zach Cooper also said that the Australian case gives a very good example.
The first is that actually China has struggled to get its political objectives obtained in Australia, and I think it's done remarkable damage to Beijing's cause. Now, I will admit that I think a lot of friends in China don't acknowledge how much damage China has done. But if you look at the objectives that China appeared to have, and here China was quite clear. In fact, the Chinese embassy in Canberra gave a list of 14 demands that they were seeking from the Australian government. And I think they've obtained precisely 0 of those demands through this economic coercion campaign. And in fact, if you look at the Australian economy, there are roughly 11 different products that were directly affected. Only 1 or 2 of those were not relatively quickly shifted to other global markets. So the damage done to the Australian economy has been much less significant than I think many in China and even many in Australia would have imagined. So I think it's a good reminder that, in fact, the world still has substantial leverage to push back against China, and even countries that are targeted can withstand that pressure, as Australia has. Now, it comes at a cost, but we're seeing increasingly that countries are willing to bear those costs. And I think the Lithuania case right now is another important example. So I think what we should take away from the Australian case is, first, you probably can't escape this kind of pressure unless you're going to fully agree with China on every issue, which very few countries and companies are willing to do. And second, that when the pressure comes, that countries can stand firm against it, especially if they have allies and partners that are willing to stand with them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So actually, I saw our viewers mentioned Taiwan. In this hearing. The panel also addressed the Taiwan issue quite a lot. And one key suggestion I hear is they suggest, the United States should help Taiwan to grow strongly, more independently, like economically, and for example, to sign economic agreements, because right now it's not being done.
Yeah, okay. So we bring so much detailed reporting on the U.S.-China relationship and or the world-China relationship. The reason is so that, we all understand it. We all understand what is indeed happening. Actually, what is happening there is very fundamental. Okay, it will impact the world as we, as time goes by. So now let's take a deeper look into the diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. Okay, in many human rights organizations' eyes, that's very limited. Personally, I agree too. But let's dig into it and find out what kind of impact or the damage has done to the CCP. Okay, so on a Monday, the diplomatic boycott was announced by the Biden administration. All right, so the spokesperson of the Chinese embassies in the U.S. in Washington D.C. Wrote a tweet. This is his word. He said, politicians calling for boycott the Beijing Olympics are doing so for their own political interests and posturing. And in fact, no one would care about whether these people come or not. And this has no impact whatsoever on the Olympics to be successful. Okay, it looks like, we can take it well. They can take it well. They don't mind. Okay, that's probably the end of the story. You can keep, coming up with a diplomatic boycott. They said nobody cared. Is that really? Nobody care? Let's follow up just a few hours later. Okay, the spokesperson of the foreign ministry of the PRC. What is foreign ministry? That's the boss of the U.S. embassy. Okay, so their boss superior came out with a very, very strong tone and a vastly different type of language. They said the United States is attempting to interfere the games out of the ideological prejudice and based upon the lies and rumors, and the U.S. will pay a price for its practices. You may stay tuned for the follow-ups. There's a lot of, just strong and ugly word, which I will not repeat. Even a party apparatus unrelated to the foreign relationship is called the Communist Party's Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. Also issue a statement saying that the spirit of the Olympic Charter cannot be tarnished. They then published a long article there.
Yeah, people wonder what does this department has to do with the Olympics.
Yeah, and in the meantime, the word boycott, okay, was banned in the online searches in China. All right, so right after this announcement was made, so you cannot even search boycott; it's not there. And so do they care or do they not? Right? The initial tweet said, "We don't care." What's the big deal about that? That's indeed one type of, countermeasure. You just show that you don't care, right?
Just dismiss it.
Dismiss it. Another is just like a super responsive, saying that we really, really want to pound the table and we hate this, we're going to fight you with this, things like that. Okay? Now, why the two different responses? Indeed, they are inconsistent. Okay, let me explain to you why. Because the first tweet was sent out without consulting their boss. All right? The guy thinks that by tweeting that, which is politically correct in the party's language, he feels that he's obligated to do that to show he's doing his job. But he's doing the damage to the party. The party doesn't like it. So internally, that person probably was, censured or something. But anyway, the latter response is the official response. They were very strong, and they really, really want to fight this. Why? Why? What do you think? Why they are so strong? Well, because they're afraid of the boycott will become a snowballing effect with country after country follows suit with the U.S. All right, so they have to speak very strong and saying that we're going to retaliate and so on and so forth to scare the other country from following the behavior, the action of the U.S. And this has to do with what does Olympic mean to CCP? Okay, in my word, growing there and reporting China for 2 decades, and Olympics really is it's a show, it's a facade, as we say.
Yeah, facade.
Facade of the CCP. And this year, Beijing, out of some luck, okay, Beijing became the first city in the Olympic history, to host both Summer Olympics and the Winter Olympics in the span of just 12 years. All right. So as we just heard from the CECC hearing, this is an international bully. Okay, but they want to use the Winter Olympics, well, and also the disability, the other game, to decorate himself into a world-class gentleman. All right.
So yeah, and I think not only this, especially with this year's theme, it said together for a shared future. It CCP positioned itself, right? To be the leader of the world, the international world.
Yeah, you have to understand the party language. Okay, understand the so-called the vision or the dream of the Xi Jinping to understand why this Winter Olympics is assuming that slogan, right? Sharing the future. That's really Xi Jinping's slogan.
So it's really, really important for CCP.
So in that sense, Winter Olympics become really just, how to say, married with the CCP, for this upcoming, game. All right. So CCP wants to use Winter Olympics to score those domestically and internationally. Okay. They want to borrow the Olympic halo onto his own head. All right. This is very important, right? Because just don't forget about that. CCP has no source for its power. Okay, it's not elected. They don't have any source. They just close the door, discuss among themselves. They decide who's the next leader. Okay, they know that kind of that vulnerability. So the source of their power is we can rule, we can bring prosperity, good life, and honor to the country. That's why we need to stay in power, and you don't say anything. It's 1.4 billion people. You cannot say anything because I bring you honor and good life. And Olympic, being able to host and run the successful Olympics is one of those honors. So they really need it. You know how much length they went in order to make this Beijing Olympics successful? It started at February 4th, right? It ended actually in March with the two back-to-back Olympics.
Yeah.
They closed the major factory in the several provinces around Beijing. You don't produce, you shut down. How do you make a living? I don't care. They don't care, basically. They don't do anything else. But other than just shut them down. Why? To reduce the pollution so that during the Olympic time, the sky is blue. That's how much length they went.
And you know how they make the grass so green? They just spray over.
Yeah, green paint.
So the Chinese CCP just pay so much attention on their face, right? It's a face thing. And so with the United States and other countries boycotting it, be it diplomatic boycott or even more intense boycott, it's a blow to the CCP.
And then now I'm talking about Olympic medals, right? Every time Olympics, you got this US ranking and the China ranking and who wins how many gold and the silver and the bronze and things like that, right? You got this competition. And I don't know about you guys, okay? If you assume that's just a fair game, you are utterly wrong, completely wrong. Why? Because the number of the Olympic medal, that's represent the CCP's image and its credibility. So no matter how much investment they want to put into it, they want to grab number one, okay? So how do they do that? How do they grab those medals? This is called, in Chinese, it's called 举国体制. They use the power and resource of the entire nation to grab that, several dozens medals. Okay, so out of 1 to 2 million people, they pick one person, grow very, very young when they're very young. I don't know that our Tony, do you have the picture? If you do, just show that. Very young, the party invests in that little kid and grow that until he doesn't have to do anything. Okay, doesn't have to worry about the tuition, doesn't worry about his academic study.
Well, basically, it's a state-run training. It's comparing to in the United States and the rest of the world, it's all amateur training, right? Or say it's parents invest into their kids. And in their spare time, they will do the training, and then they go to the game, and maybe hopefully win medals. So it's totally different system.
These little kids, how their body develop. Can you see that? Is that abnormal? Those kids are used to win the medal and win the honor for the party, so that they can stabilize the ruling of the party. Okay, this is happening to just a small number of kids. This is where the medal come from. All right. And talking about the comparison between US and China, let me quote basketball player. You know him, Yao Ming. Yao Ming was the Houston Rockets, right? And he said, we got 1.4 billion people in China, okay? But the China's Basketball Association, the registered sports, sports person there is men and women, men and female altogether, male and female, so 13,000 people. In Japan, the Basketball Association, their membership is 750,000 people. What about the U.S.? 23 million people. Okay, so in China, only 13,000. That's how they grow this their 1 or 2 medals out of that people. But in terms of general population, how much is Chinese government spend on them? The general sports. Do you know how much? I have the number in the 2015. I don't know about now. 2015 is 14 billion RMB. You think that's a lot? Whole nation, 14 billion RMB. That means 10 RMB per person. Or another way, $1 and $1.5, $1.50 per person in China and per year. So they don't spend money there. In short, they don't spend money there. This is the real thing. Okay, Olympics means a lot. And it means bring the honor to the nation, well, parenthesis, party, so that to justify the party's legitimacy. And now, because of that, they cannot bear with the Olympics not becoming an honor, but becoming a dishonor. But now it has become a dishonor because of the diplomatic boycott.
Yeah, so I think, people really are, starting to pay more and more attention on this, because I saw you saw the picture, right? It's abuse of the children. I actually interviewed a swimming Olympic medalist. She's much older now, but she used to be one of the most famous swimmers, women swimmer in China. And even, they based her story and other her team member story to put a film on it. But she said the training they went through, it's just abusive. And at the age of only maybe I think around 22 or 23, she got her whole body has injured. And luckily, later on at that time, she's almost just paralyzed. Okay, at the age of 23, 24. So, but luckily she was introduced to a meditation practice, which is called the Falun Gong or Falun Dafa by her neighbor. And, she just practiced it, and miraculously she recovered. And now she's in Japan, having a very good life. She was trained Japanese kids to swim. She said she could not imagine if just, follow the CCP's training, their path, and if there's no help, she might not be living right now.
Yeah. So it is a public secret in China and Russia, okay? For those socialist country, the doping and the stimulants, using the stimulants, it's really a public secret. Because they have to win the medal. So no matter what way, however way they want to take, and what kind of means, they take it, okay? Because they need to win the medal. Only at that time they win the approval of the party, and the party need the medals as the honor of the party. So that destroyed the health of so many athletes.
Yeah.
Okay, very sad. Some shiny medalists then become very, very poor because they couldn't learn anything as they grow up. They only know how to run this particular sports. They don't learn things. They don't read enough, and they cannot speak, things like that. So their whole life is destroyed after they submitting that medal. So this is true. I know I'm not overstating it. This is what happened behind the China's Olympics. I don't know whether you know this or not. Maybe you already know this. If so, that's great for you. If not, I really want to bring this to you. So that's okay. Now let's come back to this boycott. The boycott means a lot. Means a lot to CCP. It turned an Olympic honor into an Olympic dishonor. And from now to February 4th, there's about 55 days. Every day, a new country could come out and saying that they're going to boycott. Now we got New Zealand, we got Australia, we got Great Britain, we got Canada, we got Lithuania. We're going to 5 countries plus US, 6 countries. Any day, any country can come forth saying that we want to boycott it. So that's an excruciating period of time for CCP. Now every day they're sitting there, they say, what's going to hit me today? And of course they're gonna wage a big, international diplomatic campaign, counter campaign to threaten every country. Dare you? How dare you follow US? We're going to retaliate.
Or maybe just entice them, right?
Yeah.
Some of the small countries.
Entice them or threaten them. So then this is another issue. The final issue I want to bring forth here. It is a test of morality for every country in this world. Because for this, nearly 200 countries, okay, for them, if they join Winter Olympics, whether they send a government delegation there or not is a conscious decision. They cannot say, oh, I just don't want to make any decision. They have to make a decision whether to send one or not send one. Okay, it's a conscious decision. So it becomes a test that every country has to pass. So we're going to see how this test play out. We're going to see how they answer the test.
Yeah, and I think, there's also argument about whether the athletes should go to the Olympics or not. I think it's really really, to be frank, it's not a fair question to them. It is really because of the CCP. And they turned this Olympic game, which supposedly, the athletes, they trained for years and they, it's their stage to perform. So for the athletes won't be able to go, or some, many of them may still decided to go. I think, they deserve just not blaming, but really need more education about what's going on in China with the Olympic Games. And then they can make a conscious decision, right? So I think, I saw like Mark Myrtle, one of our audience, you are sharing our shows with your friends, really appreciate it. Please, share the information with your friends and loved ones so that more people understand the truth about the evilness of CCP, about what's behind the Olympic Games, and then people can make a conscious choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right. So let's keep our eyes open on which country make what choice. It's an important test for them. It looks like a small issue. It's not a small issue, actually. Okay, we'll see. That's all for today.
Oh, yeah, and this Mark Murdo said that do you want to answer this question?
Yeah,
so you choose Safe Chat over Rumble. Maybe you can have a comment on it. Mm-hmm. It's off topic for now.
Okay. Yeah, actually, we should be on both. Okay. The reason why we choose Safe Chat is because we interview them. Okay, we evaluate them. We know their drive. We know their their motivation. They're clean and they are very, very they're clean, simple, and very, very motivated. Okay, we see they're gonna run long distance in the future. That's why we emphatically recommend them. And with other platforms.
And also like the live streaming function, right?
Right.
Rumble does not really have it. But we're going to post our shows on Rumble, more regularly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you. Please share our show if you can. As you know, that we are really kind of, suppressed. But we're still here and we will be here. And let's persist through. And to you, it's just finding the truth. To us, revive good media. All right, thank you for your support.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us. Take care.
All right.
Okay, good night.
Until Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.